In this real-side experience, I would find myself in the company of another individual that through his appearance would suggest he was human, but then what presents itself on the simulated literal front of the real side may not always be as it visually appears, as would later prove to be the case. For indeed he and I were absorbed in the construction of what seemed to be very advanced technology. Certainly that which is beyond the technology as made available for the human race at this current moment. Our location would never be revealed, only that it was another dimensional position, a planet of some kind, and where a very extensive series of structures had been placed for the purposes of scientific research and development, and that what we were putting together in the open countryside area in the immediate vicinity of these science-orientated buildings was an extension of the projects being executed there. The other individual present in the scene, the man, would be taking the lead with the project we were involved with, as he boasted an extraordinary skill and knowledge where advanced science applications were concerned. He was a no-nonsense character, and seemingly we had a certain deadline by which our work could be completed. My personal self would have no current lifetime ability where advanced science was concerned, and so this was really a case of my being involved with this overall project, but through the orchestration of the real awareness. For indeed, as the real awareness is a part of the everything isness reality, that which animates through all consciousness, as it effect expresses as all the myriad forms and simulated features that it does, so every idea of all consciousness, which effects as the entirety of simulator circumstance and situation, is available to the real awareness. As such, anything that is required for its simulation inserted body forms to operate in whatever capacities are required is made available. As this was an assignment which served as life and awareness beneficial as impressions suggested, a case then of the real awareness dictating proceedings, animating the simulated body type to carry out the scientific proceedings I was involved with, and where the personal self simply sits back and observes what it is being shown, like a passenger in a car, and attempts to make sense of what is visually transpiring with the additional real awareness impressions which help to shed light on the experience. For as we embrace the real intent for is recognition, as simulation and experience follows intent, so everything we do on the real side will be to this end, that our actions and activities are as a support for all life and awareness, that in turn, through the reflective principle, that of everything equaling itself, so we become more aware, that as we support the awareness of others to the point whereas we become as the all is, a constant promoting and demonstration of the true reality, so we in turn become absolute with our position in relation to the true reality we are a part of. To be absolute with something, we must be that something absolutely, and in regards to the is, we become eventually as it is, an absolute support for all life, that we and everything actually is. For in actuality, what else would there be other than supporting that which is everything? Anything other than this would be supporting of that which the is isn't, that being the pieces, the parts, the ideas, the fabricated unreality of the simulators. Nothing would be revealed, however, as to the application of the scientific endeavours I was participating in at this stage of the experience, and as it transpired, a storm would be coming. Necessary was it for us to cease the project we were involved with, as it was being carried out beyond the confines of the science buildings, as I said. Visually, what we were doing made little sense to my personal self, the technology of such a particular that no comparable references were available to draw upon by which I could describe it, other than it being advanced. Impressions revealed that this storm was in some way dark force instigated, that perhaps the dark forces had the ability to manipulate weather on the planet we were on, just as they do on the Earth, etc., with their various Earth-based HARP systems and so forth. Quite clearly then, our project did not sit well with the dark forces. Very likely then it represented an undermining of the maintenance of their control in some form, or they would not be opposed to our operation and seek to disrupt it through the destructive harnessing of the weather. Impressions suggested the necessity of this particular project being conducted in the open environments surrounding the science buildings, and as the technology was delicate, in that it could be damaged through abrasive weather, logically we would have ensured that we wouldn't be disrupted by any environmental factors. But as I said, perhaps my associate, the one taking charge of our project, was unaware of the somewhat unnatural nature of the unexpected turn in the weather, of the warning of an impending storm he had received. As I said, real awareness impressions would unveil that the storm, soon to be bombarding our position and posing as a risk to the technology we were utilizing, was by the manipulative hand of the darker forces. Impressions further revealing the man I was with wasn't an individual on his awareness process, but was agreeable that his work and that of the team of scientists operating in the buildings be used beneficially, and I had been assigned this opportunity to work alongside him and the science team, and whatever would come of this. Another scientist would enter the scene, the environment we were in, and assist us in shutting down the equipment. For as we were set to terminate the project for the moment, until the storm abated, the nature of the technology would be designed that it could as though fold in, accordion in on itself, and what would remain would be a series of small metallic cubes that were impervious to weather and external factors, regardless of how severe. This protective mechanism was triggered through the actions of the new arrival to the scene, a heavy-set black human in appearance scientist. For as we finalized our computations with the technology, he would then intend to manipulate what appeared visually to be several beams of blue energy, but as he reached for them, he suddenly would be as though blasted with the energy that rendered him dead. This, of course, shouldn't have occurred, and as we checked the technology, we discovered it had been sabotaged in such a way as not only had it killed the other scientist, but the entire contraption was set to self-destruct, and so extensive would the blast be that everything within several miles of the scene we were in and where the technology was positioned would be destroyed in the blast radius. At that point the storm would hit, that even were the imminent destruction of the technology due to the sabotaging not so, the extent of rain, and the speed by which it gathered and became as a flood water, submerging our position within seconds in several feet of water, would have the technology rendered useless, for we were unable to activate its defensive mechanism, that it form into self-protecting metallic cubes, as I said. Any contact with the controls that activated the cube state, and the same fate would befall our body forms as it had been with the other scientist. The leader of the project, realizing he was unable to remove himself from the blast radius in time, would alter his physical form, that not only was he afforded a more robust and resilient body form, but where he now could breathe under water, for his form became more that of a bipedal amphibian, his skin a smooth yellow coloration, and he would submerge himself under the water. Impressions suggested the nature of the energy set to blast from the technology was mitigated to an extent through liquid water mediums, and additionally his newly acquired body form had a greater resiliency to external stressors than the human form he had previously been. Evidently then these scientists were not human, but a group comprising of these amphibious body types, but endowed with shape-shifting capability seemingly, but that had elected to operate as human body forms in this experience. Impressions revealed the lead scientist was safe enough, and I would relocate from the environmental scene to reposition myself beyond the blast radius of the technology, as the energy it would produce as it self-destructed may well have adverse repercussions in regards to the body form I was operating through. The dark forces had ensured the destruction of the technology we were working with, but impressions suggested this was but a minor setback in the overall project, and although presenting as a delay, ultimately we would get back on track and utilize the finished product for whatever it was intended for. I would now momentarily relocate myself inside a vehicle. Present would be the driver, a male, and a female sat beside him in the front seat. The female representing the authority, but both characters were Dark Force agents, and had in fact been those responsible for sabotaging the technology I and the scientist had been working on, causing the death of one scientist and the destruction of the technology itself. Although in the presence of these two dubious characters, and where I could eavesdrop on their conversational exchange, where they were discussing and congratulating themselves over the successful execution of their disrupting efforts, I had rendered myself imperceptible to them, operating through a simulated form also, but beyond the perceptual acuity of the two agents, as though a frequency bubble aside from that which their body forms were operating within, and they could then discern. Confirmation then of the impressions revealing the Dark Force's hand in the sabotage effort. The two culprits had been revealed, and undoubtedly they will have to deal with the effects of their own chosen abrasiveness, for we always are the effects of ourselves. Our experiences always will reflect in equal measure our consciousness design and life choices. But as I said, they had only delayed the progress, they hadn't derailed it, and now I would remove myself from their ill-intended midst as they proceeded to drive their vehicle to whichever destination they were intending next. Were we to construe this as a purely symbolic, as vehicles can represent ideas on the real side, we might say they were sitting within the shared idea they had concocted and executed, that being the destruction of the technology and death of the scientist, their destination then would be the effect, that which ultimately would be abrasive circumstances for them in equal measure to their destructive deeds. I now would relocate back to the planet where the science buildings and the shape-shifting amphibious beings resided. I would be in another open area just beyond the array of buildings, and although from the personal self perspective I had transitioned from the vehicle with the saboteurs directly to this next scene, in reality between these two positions I had been on an extensive assignment on behalf of the scientists. For of the everything that is occurring creationally, the personal self is shown but fragments, that which is necessary for it to see, and very often we can jump and skip parts of our progress and activities, as though fast-forwarding the movie we are watching, as it's simply a case of the real awareness revealing what parts of the everything multi-dimensionally the personal self is to have revealed to it. I would now be in the presence of the overall scientist leader. The other individual who had taken the lead with the technology operation I was previously involved with was as though in charge of that particular project, and now the scientist leader would ask of me as to my progress in attaining the artifacts he required. That this had seemingly been my assignment between the scenes of being in the car with the dark agents and returning to the science buildings, an assignment that had spanned quite the duration of so-called time. Impressions revealed that the group of scientists here not only were involved in beneficial technology-orientated projects, of which I was involving myself also, but that they had at some point hidden certain objects or artifacts throughout time. These artifacts were essential for their work, and through their technological genius had they managed to conceal these items throughout multiple dimensions, and specifically through what we would consider as the past. Through their technology had they been able to do this, for their overall project would take quite the duration for its completion, and until it was completed they always would be vulnerable to attacks, disruption, and interference, as in the case with the Dark Force agents, where they destroyed one of the projects. And these items, whatever they were, could be potentially very dangerous and used for destructive purposes if they fell into the keeping of the darker forces. Consequently, they had hidden these items throughout time and dimensions until the moment they would be required, as opposed to run the risk of having them stolen, and now seemingly was the moment where their retrieval was required, suggesting the situation where the project I was involved with had been destroyed had been rectified. The overall project had resumed its course, and I had been consequently deployed to retrieve these essential items or technological components that the overall project could be completed. That although the scientists could seemingly access prior time periods and conceal their items safely, they couldn't then retrieve them with the same technological means, as though this could prove hazardous in some way. For indeed, every idea, every era, every timeline of every individual and species is in effect now, in isness reality terms, and only through the consciousness design are body types affected where these ideas run in time frame sequences, and according to the respective consciousness, individual or species-wise, dictates what part of the everything of ideas pertaining to the species or individual is being experienced. That as an example, the entire human history is present in the nowness, but according to the arrangement of my consciousness of idea agreements, dictates what of the human history I am experiencing. And from the personal perspective, the position I was in, be it individually or species-wise, would be construed as the past, and that which has yet to effect as physical level events, the future. Although ideas build upon themselves, and this escalating compounding of ideas effects as progression from one state of simulated affairs to another as presented through the body form mechanics. Naturally then, if I alter an idea in a consciousness, that is the foundation of other ideas that follow, so rippling through will be alteration to the overall timeline. That if a movie's end is the effect of an idea, even though, from the personal perspective, I am sitting through an already completed movie in is-this reality terms, if I alter the initial idea, so then will the ideas that follow and build upon it alter accordingly, and the movie's end will then be altered, and I am processing through a changed overall movie. But that everything is present in the nowness of the ears, so will be every idea alteration that effects every changed movie, and we have then alternate overall simulator bubbles, that for every idea that is created in addition, so a new simulator bubble comes into being, but the bubbles linked through the additional ideas that brought the newly created simulator bubbles into a manifestation, that as I change an idea present within one of them, this will ripple through and effect alteration to all the simulator bubbles that were created subsequently. The dark forces have the ability to access what are in reality previous bubble simulators of this simulator and attempt to make alterations that ripple through as more favourable circumstances for them in regards to their controlling endeavours. However, they do this through the use of a crude technology that can potentially be very destructive. These scientists then had developed a far more advanced and less hazardous means of a prior simulator bubble access, but for whatever reason they could only access safely what would be various moments of the past from the personal self perspective once, and beyond that they would run the danger of causing damage to the very simulator, just as the dark forces recklessly continue to do. They could place their items, but couldn't then retrieve them. But through the real awareness, which is through all ideas of all consciousness, what can be construed as a past, present and a future from the processing perspective of the body vehicle mechanics, so can the real awareness deploy its simulated forms into any idea effecting simulated situation that from a literal point of view we can time travel. And for individuals that are operating in the nowness of their real awareness, where such a time travelling so-called is possible, if it makes sense to do so, in this case then I had been assigned to operate in this capacity, to retrieve all the items and components scattered through time, return them to the scientists, and they then could complete their project. I would be given a hint as to the nature of their work, for impressions revealed that they were in some way attempting to stabilize the very simulator, that perhaps it had been unduly compromised or distorted in some way recently, that had it lurching far swifter toward implosion, swifter than the usual speed of its deterioration through the consciousness that affects its state of being, and through the application of their technology of the securing of these essential components, so they could in some way mitigate whatever it was that had accelerated the simulator's decay. Very likely a dark force orientated contribution to the simulator's deterioration. Interestingly, as I was updating the lead scientist as to my progress, which as it transpired was proving a monumentally arduous task, in that I had only secured but a handful of the assorted array of components hidden in the various dimensions and past that they were, there would be a number of huge dinosaurs laying dead in the area we were in, and in some way this was indicative of the additionally applied distortion to the simulator, though exactly why wasn't revealed. There was one dinosaur-like body type, however, reminiscent of a T-Rex, though considerably larger, more the size of a Godzilla, and who was somewhat in a state of distress due to the dead dinosaurs that littered the ground. Impressions revealed he was actually part of the science team. He was working in collusion with them, and a body type where the secondary free will idea creating a personal self had been established. And although no impressions would reveal his identity, he evidently shared in the scientist's desires to operate in a beneficial capacity and attempt to stabilize the very simulator. Very possibly a former Dark Force reptilian of some standing, as a size on the real side can indicate awareness but also a status. Status in regards to how we perceive ourselves or as we are perceived by others. And perhaps then this was a reptilian that had occupied a prominent position in the Dark Force hierarchies of control, and had recently elected to instead step up and contribute his abilities to the cause the scientists were involved with, simulator stabilization. Could the colossal T-Rex be the Callum god himself, perhaps? For indeed, the T-Rex is considered king of the dinosaurs. The Callum sits at the pinnacle of the Dark Force control structure throughout creation, and oftentimes on the real side he is represented in this form, that even if he didn't intend to step up and embark on his own awareness process, might he not see the prudence of assisting where the stabilizing of a simulator he is resigning himself to is concerned? If so, this would beg the question as to what had caused the instability. Perhaps it was an inadvertent effect through actions of the darker forces, as they cannot realize every outcome for that which they do, being relatively unconscious and unaware as they also are, blundering through creation as they do with their dangerous technologies. But regardless of the identity of this reptilian, this was the situation, and I would be agreeable to continue in my quest to secure the items and artifacts that the project could be completed and in theory stabilize the simulator, as this seemed to be the overall objective as impressions revealed.